Hey everybody, it's Dan here. Trying something new, creating a video for YouTube based on some research I've done. Basically, I've been playing around with a little bit of Google Earth. I've been going back on My Soccer Almanac website and adding and doing some more research on a few leagues, adding player data and keeper data, schedules, fixtures, and one of those is adding venue data where the games are being played and attendance and things like that. And I've gone back and I've looked at the first couple of years of the American Soccer League, which I've done research on before, and I thought I'd just put together a real informal presentation on the first season venues of the American Soccer League and have some different information and just play around with it because I think it's kind of cool and I like visualizing things as I'm kind of presenting data. So that's kind of it. Real quick background on the American Soccer League. First season was 1921-22, traditional soccer season, fall through spring, which basically the U.S. had for the most part until the late 60s, when North American Soccer League started, and it kind of shifted a lot of the league play to the summer, spring and summer. It's considered at the time and now the first major soccer league, major professional soccer league in the U.S. Professionalism was all over the U.S. 20s, early teens, early 20th century. It wasn't quite as kind of stratified as it is now. There were amateur leagues only. There were some professional leagues out there. Probably the biggest one around this time was the St. Louis Soccer League, which had been fully professional since around the second decade of the 20th century, but it was very much on a very much more smaller scope than the American Soccer League. And it was the first professional soccer league fully sanctioned by the U.S. Soccer Football Association, which is now known as the U.S. Soccer Federation. U.S. Soccer Federation. So it's a pretty meaningful league in U.S. soccer history. It started in 1921. It lasted the first iteration, what called the Golden Age iteration, what people consider ASL, the first league, for about 10 years, a little bit after that, and then it transitioned after the soccer wars of right around the Great Depression when that hit into, it was still professional league and still sanctioned by the USFA, but not quite at a major quote unquote scale as it was in its first 10 years or so. That's kind of it. Like everything back around that time, it was centered on the East Coast, specifically, the north part of the Mid-Atlantic, Northeast, those big cities, the big soccer centers in the U.S. You might have read, it was a merger of these two leagues, the National Association Football League and the Southern New England Football League. It's not a real merger, just some teams from each of those leagues joined the American Soccer League with some other teams, both new teams and teams that had already been playing soccer. So it wasn't a merger, but for the bigger teams in those leagues, some of the bigger teams in those kind of two leagues did join the American Soccer League. I think we might as well start. So we will start with, I had this in alphabetical order, and then I moved things around. So we will start with, let's start with West Side Park. So this team that played at West Side Park was the Celtic FC, and I've got, this is, like I said, informal. I don't have a script written or anything like that. I'm just gonna go look at my notes every once in a while. You might hear me clicking. So this is a bit of a curiosity. So 8 teams joined the American Soccer League for their initial season. It was formally launched May of 1921. The season began in early September, and one of those teams was Celtic FC, which it didn't exist before the summer of 1921. its first match was July 10, 1921, against a team called Third Lanark, or All Scots. It was a touring team from Scotland of top level Scottish players. And they played at Westside Park, as you see here in Jersey City, New Jersey. A team was created called Celtic FC. It was a all-star team of players brought together for this team. They played before 6,000 fans here at Westside Park. They lost. Celtic FC lost 4-2. That team then was one of the franchises that joined the American Soccer League in the fall of 1921. And you may have heard of them as the Jersey City Celtics. Again, that's a bit of an Americanization kind of term, kind of putting those two putting the town name before the name of the team. But they were technically Celtic Football Club of Jersey City. They played in Westside Park. It's also was known as Skeeters Park. You'll see a lot of this in this time period where, baseball was the biggest sport in the U.S. Up until relatively recently, and so soccer was played during American football season, right, fall to spring. That's the off season for baseball. So a lot of soccer teams would play in the local baseball fields, baseball parks, because baseball wasn't playing then. So, right, baseball in the summer, football, soccer in the fall, winter, and the early spring. And Celtic FC was no different. They're playing at the Jersey City minor league baseball team's park called Westside Park. And here you see it. It's on Westside Avenue and Bayview Avenue. I've got an overlay here of, there's this great resource for maps. It's called the Sanborn Insurance Map Collection. Sanborn was an insurance company, and what they did basically at the end of the 19th century to the early parts of the 20th century is they created these maps for insurance purposes, and they're very detailed maps of good parts of the United States during the early part of the 20th century, and then they would create a volume of different areas, and then over time they would go back and they would update it. So, and this is all now in the you can go get them at the Library of Congress. Library of Congress has been kind of creating these amazing copies and putting them online for free. So they're public domain at this part. And what I wanted to do is to visualize where these parks were based on kind of what the landscape looks like now. And so most of these parks we'll talk about, almost all of them I believe aren't there anymore, but it's interesting to see kind of where they're situated, how, where these games were played. So this is Jersey City. Westside Park was oriented here south of southwestish, whatever, southeast of Westside Avenue and Culver Avenue, between Audubon and Culver and College Street. And usually the orientation for a soccer field was kind of down the line. So here, I believe, I'm not 100% sure, as you'll see the grandstand there at the upper right hand corner. The soccer field usually ran kind of oriented this, how you're looking at it now, up and down, north and south. So Celtic FC, actually, they played that first exhibition match. Their first match proper was September 18th, 1921, away at Todd Shipyard. So obviously we get to them. They were due to play their first home game on October 2nd, 1921, against the Fall River team, but they had to cancel it. They had another, so that was supposed to be their fourth league match. Their actual fourth league match was October 8th away. Then they played the first round of the National Challenge Cup, which is now the U.S. Open Cup, at home at Jersey City, and they won that match to make it in the second round. They played away. Then they lost their home match against Harrison SC, who we'll talk about as a fellow American Soccer League team in the second round of the National Challenge Cup. Then they had to cancel their next home matches. They had financial problems. They never actually played a home league match here at Westside Park. They played a couple of National Challenge Cup matches there, and then they actually went out of business. They disbanded. They only played 5 matches, two Challenge Cup matches, and then they disbanded, and disbanded in late November, early December after only playing 5 league matches. And they withdrew. They basically ran out of money, couldn't find a park. I think they had trouble kind of figuring out when they could play at Westside Park for some reason. They're a bit of, like I said, they're a bit of a curiosity. They kind of came, they played a few games, and then they left, and was never heard from since. What the American Soccer League did is they just, because they only played 5 matches, they just wiped those games off the schedule, and they recreated the schedule. So those 5 matches that the Celtics played don't even count in the official standings, the goals the players made. They lost all 5 matches. They only won that one first round National Challenge Cup match before disappearing into history and never being heard of since. But they're an important piece of history, bit of a curiosity, and it's just interesting to see where they're located. I'll pull back here, and I'll turn this, and you can see they're oriented kind of east to west. I'll turn it north here. This is north-south. Here they are in Jersey City. This is where they are located. I'll just pull out there. There's a couple other. I've pinned, also pinned the stadia with these yellow pins. So that's Celtic FC, number 1. So next one we'll go to another interesting one is go north up to western Massachusetts. Holyoke, Massachusetts, to Falco Field. This team is another kind of one and done team with the American Soccer League. It's Falco FC. You might have seen them called Falco AA, Falco Athletic Association. They were a top level of their time amateur club. They weren't supposed to be part of the American Soccer League. But they joined their actual franchise, and the American Soccer League was a franchise league, like American League Baseball, National League Baseball, like we have today, kind of the typical American professional league. Franchises, clubs own those franchises. So what happened, and we'll talk about this a little bit more when we get to the Philadelphia team. Bethlehem Steel, during the late teens, or until about this time, was probably the best soccer team in the U.S. at this time period, right as the season started. Played in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. Bethlehem Steel, that's where they got their money, the Bethlehem Steel Corporation. And so they were part of the original group that signed up to join the American Soccer League to found it in May of that year. What happened is right before the season started, literally the season started beginning of September 1921. A month before, early August of 1921, Bethlehem Steel withdrew from the league. They had an issue they quit the league because of a disagreement on gate receipts, on how the money taken in for games at the gate was apportioned out. And I'm just gonna look over here. Bethlehem wanted a 65%, 35% split. So the home side would keep 65% of the ticket money, and the visitor would get 35%. But some of the rest of the teams couldn't agree on this. They wanted the home team to take the entire gate. The issue with Bethlehem, and they'll return to the league they'll come and rejoin the league in the second season. Reason Bethlehem, even though they're a very popular team, they would draw when they would go away. At home, they really didn't pull down a lot of the support. These big professional teams would draw 1, 2, 3, 5,000, maybe 6,000, right in that area. At home, Bethlehem Steel would draw in the hundreds, high hundreds, maybe around 1,000. And this would be an issue for them their entire time as a big name team. And so to make it worthwhile for them to be in this league, professional league, to outlay all this money, they needed more money. And if they were only getting home receipts money, they weren't getting nearly as much as the other teams were. And so it turns out they proposed this split. It didn't go anywhere. They had to withdraw it, and they themselves withdrew from the league. So the league had an issue. They had this 8th franchise open out there. They wanted to go with 8 teams, which is a very traditional number. They didn't want to go smaller than that. And so that last month, Falco Football Club of Holyoke took over that franchise. So it was originally Bethlehem's franchise. Bethlehem withdrew, and then Falco took over that franchise. And franchise, when I say it in today, you think that might be thinking the franchise and the team that plays is the same thing. The franchise really just means the membership in that league, right? You can be a team that has a separate franchise and team. You think about it a little bit separately in this time period we're talking about. So Bethlehem owned a membership, one of the 8 memberships in the American Soccer League. They withdrew, so there was that 8th franchise sitting out there, and Falco took over that franchise. So just a little bit of background about how they joined. Falco Field, here's another overlay. It pretty much at this point in time was a field. I'm not sure how many stands they had. It also was earlier known, as you see underneath it here, Berkshire Street. It was also known as Berkshire Street Grounds. I think that was the name of it before Falco took over. And Falco is a shortening of Far Alpaca Corporation. So a lot of these teams at this time period, and especially north of this, were basically a resource by. They got their money from a big industry. That's kind of during the World War I, those late teens in the 20th century. A lot of the big teams were basically funded by big companies, big industries, and they had these soccer teams, which were kind of an extension of that company. And a lot of the players, most of the players were working for those big companies, maybe hired to be a soccer player or not, but they worked for the companies and played for the soccer team, and it was a way for them to almost advertise themselves, but it was also kind of a way to advertise that their workers would be healthy, right, and active and things like that. So anyway, so Falco Athletic Association, formerly called it used to be called Far Alpaca FC. It became known around this time as the Falco Athletic Association. So this is the Falco Athletic Association's football club. So Falco FC played in Holyoke. Again, similar. Like I said, it was a big time kind of amateur team, Western Mass. It was making this jump, and it just had trouble making the jump from amateur pro at this point. They kind of struggled through the season. I think their field was pretty much kind of an old baseball field. This field was also used for like fairs and traveling circuses and things like that. I think at one point it had like I said before, a bigger grandstand that was no longer there at this time. When it used to be known as the Berkshire Street Grounds, Falco took it over. And so you can see on this, I forget when this is from, I think 1915, and then updated to maybe 1956. There's just nothing there. It's just a big open field. And I'm going to scroll out here because it's very interesting that all these areas here are old kind of industry, old factories and things like that. And it was sat here next to a refuse disposal plant and south of a pond, which a lot of this stuff is gone, and now there's a interstate that runs through it, and then there's this kind of industry here. So totally gone, nothing there anymore. It is oriented, as you see, kind of north-south is, I'm not exactly sure which direction the field was. Some of these I'd love to get photographs over time to put them on here. But again, very interesting. Holyoke, Western Massachusetts back then was kind of a hotbed for soccer, and that's why the Holyoke Falcos, you might have heard of them as Holyoke Falcos, was part of the American Soccer League. I think they were next to last that season, something like that. They started playing fairly well, and then I think maybe 10 games into the season, there's supposed to be like a 28 game schedule. Halfway through the season, they just kind of were overtaken by the other clubs and kind of ended the season down near the bottom of the table, and they gave up their franchise at the end of the season. They didn't return for the second season, even though the Falco team, Farah Packet team, continued in New England League. So that's Falco Field in Holyoke. Next one, we will move to Fall River Athletic Grounds in Fall River, Massachusetts. This is a super important situation. So you may have heard that the first team in the American Soccer League was called the Fall River Rovers. You also may have heard that the first Fall River team in the American Soccer League was the Fall River Marksmen. And you maybe thought, oh, there's the same team, and things like that. And it's kind of not that simple. It's a tiny bit complicated. We'll get to the Marksmen in a second. So Fall River Athletic Grounds, late 19th century, first 2 decades of the 20th century, was the main athletic grounds in Fall River, Massachusetts. Baseball would play there in the summer, and how it worked in a lot of these places was somebody would own the property, and then teams would rent the property for the season. So a team would rent the summer season for baseball, right? And then baseball season over, then soccer team would rent it for the soccer season. So it was, again, like a lot of these places, it was mainly baseball grounds, but soccer was played there on a regular basis. Fall River is like I said, a hotbed for soccer at this time period, to the middle part or later part of the 20th century. It really is a soccer city, especially when we get to the Marksmen in a little bit. So the biggest, most important soccer team at this point in time in Fall River was the Fall River Rovers. And what they would do is Fall River traditionally, and this is just how it worked, it wasn't like any type of rule or regulation like that, they would rent right at the beginning of the soccer season, they would get a rental on the Fall River Athletic Grounds. The owners would rent them the grounds for the season, because they were the top team, and then other teams would then sublease from Fall River Rovers to play their games there. So that's just kind of how they control the grounds for the soccer season. So you can see kind of practical hierarchy there at work. And it was basically a done deal that they were going to join the American Soccer League when it was started, and they were putting it together like in that winter of 1920, 1921. A few practical things, 2 big practical things happened why that never came about. First off, I think there was a bit of a disconnect between the founders of the American Soccer League, mostly Thomas Cahill, who was kind of the person behind it, and the leadership of Fall River Rovers. They seemed to be clashing times. They just seemed to get along with each other, and it wasn't an easy kind of situation for them to join. Early part of 1921, a new organization kind of popped up. Say they wanted to kind of put on sporting events in Fall River, eventually called Fall River United Athletic Association. And they ultimately got the lease on Fall River Athletic Grounds, not the Rovers. The Rovers, I can't remember the particulars, but basically the Fall River United AA beat them to it. They maybe kind of outbid them. So Fall River United had the lease on Fall River Athletic Grounds for the soccer season of 1921-22. Number one. Number two, the Rovers just didn't have a great relationship with Cahill. And so what happened is Fall River United got invited to join the ASL. They got the Fall River franchise for the ASL, not the Rovers, even though everybody kind of thought it was just going to be the Rovers. And even it was in the papers, you'll see that, the Rovers joined, but they didn't. I think there was just a misunderstanding. There's an expectation there. It was Fall River United that joined. And so completely new soccer team. Their first match, Fall River United, like Celtic FC, was in July of 1921. They played that third Lanark, quote, all-Scott traveling all-star team in July at Athletic Grounds. 4,000 came to watch them, drew 2-2. The Fall River United team was another all-star team themselves. They hired a bunch of good soccer players and did a good job against Third Arc, drawing them 2-2. So that was their first game. Then they built a new team in a couple months, and their first match, real true match, was September 17. They hosted Falco FC team at the athletic grounds. Only 600 people came out because the weather was atrocious. Fall River United would get about 2,000 fans, 2,000 to 3,000 fans each game. They also, kind of like Falco, they just couldn't put a team together that was able to really kind of compete. They kind of lost ground as the season wore on, and they finished kind of lower part of the table. I'll get back to the stadium in a second because there's something interesting going on there. But so we'll quickly talk about the Marksmen United and the Rovers. So we've talked about three teams now. Fall River United is a third team that doesn't return to the American Soccer League in their second season. Again, some practical things happen there. One, near the end of the soccer season, the owners of the Fall River Athletic Grounds, again, this had been the place to play baseball and soccer and other athletic events in Fall River, the main one. And in mid 1921, the owners decided, we're kind of done with that. We're going to chop it up into and sell it as property for developers. And then there was kind of a back and forth of the United and then the Rovers. They actually kind of combined after the ASL season ended to say, oh no, we want to keep playing. And basically the owner said, I think it was new ownership that just bought, said, unless you can pay us this exorbitant amount, and at least we got to chop it up. The United / Rovers did kind of merge in some way after the soccer season, but they couldn't put together a good enough deal for the owners, and so that was it for the athletic grounds in 1921. I think they played some stuff was there, but they were at that point it was done as a real baseball athletic grounds. This kind of Fall River United Rovers kind of merged group lost the option on the ASL franchise. That went to Sam Mark, who basically got the option because he said, I'm going to build this big stadium in Tiverton, North Tiverton, which is just right across the border in Rhode Island from Fall River. And I'm going to I've got a big, huge piece of land. I'm actually going to build an actual soccer stadium. So give me the franchise. And they did, the ASL did. And so that team that he started in the fall of 1922 was Fall River FC, Fall River Football Club, which is better known as the Marksmen because it's not their real name, but it's a great nickname. And so so Fall River Rovers never joined the ASL. Fall River United was the Fall River franchise during the first season, but they left after that first season, and then the Fall River SC Marksmen, which everybody knows about, took over the franchise. It's a different team. It's just the franchise that continues. So those are three separate teams, and they started in 1922, 1923. So let's get back to the grounds just for a second. I'm going to hide it because if you see here, I think you can see my cursor. If you can see here, here's where the grandstand was, right? So baseball diamond, comes out here. Here's the grandstand, a little, I think, office or something here. What's very interesting is a little bit of history is I think most of this property here was under one deed, but I think this little chunk here wasn't, and it had passed down through other old school means, and so they had to figure out the ownership of this, which took a while. So this kind of bit wasn't included for a while, but what you will see, and I'm going to zoom in here. So here's what the baseball field looked like, right? Beaches Grandstand. If I get rid of it, what you'll see is still here is the foundation right here of the grandstand. I'm not exactly sure. I think there's some brick there and maybe some cement, but you literally, the curvature, it's going to take for a second to load. The curvature is there right here. You can see it underneath. It's just really fascinating that it's still there. And I'm just going to zoom out here to show you where it's located in that Fall River area here. Yeah. So FYI, here's Fall River in the athletic grounds. The Mark Stadium, where the Fall River Marksmen played, is over here. North Tiverton is up here, just across the border. So that's Fall River. Just really important, interesting story about the transition of how we got not the Rovers joining and how we got Sam Mark and the Marksmen joining. It's there's a lot of practical things there that made it come about. So the next team we'll go to is Harrison Soccer Club. Sadly, I don't have a sandboard map of this, and I don't have any map. I'm still looking for it. But it's Harrison, New Jersey. Here, Harrison Park was pretty much this square here, which is now, I think it's like, I think it might be schools, something to that effect. It might be a school or some. Here's light industrial, and you can see this interstate here. Here's the Red Bull Arena right here, right? And so Harrison Oval. Harrison Park is another name that was called. Harrison Oval was an alternative name, not just right there, but a completely different look when it back then. You can walk to where it is if you want to go look at it. Harrison SC is an offshoot. It's not the same organization. It's the same people who ran. There's a team called Erie Athletic Association in Harrison, which was part of the National Association Football League, which was New York, New Jersey area, probably one of the biggest soccer leagues in the country at that time. I think it went up a little bit north than that. It wasn't fully professional, but it had a lot of professionalism in it. If you want to call it semi-pro, I guess you could call it. But there are some teams were fully professional, some teams were partially professional. I think Erie was amateur. It was an athletic association, Erie Athletic Association. So, Erie AA was one of the teams that was kind of part of the group who was going to originally found the American Soccer League. Their leaders from that Erie AA team created this new soccer team for the 2021 season called Harrison SC. Offshoot. A lot of the same people were part of it. Harrison, New Jersey, hotbed of soccer. Harrison, Kearney, East Newark really is one of the core places of soccer in the U.S. And they played a lot of local players. A lot of the other teams brought in. There were so many UK players, like professionals, came over because the pay was better. Mostly Scottish. I mean, the percentage of Scottish players in the ASL was off the charts. There's tons of Scottish influence in the game in the U.S. at the time, but especially in the American Soccer League. Harrison had some, but it was mostly made up of local players. That's where they played. They lasted, I think, the next season. They played not technically here, and if I do another one, we'll talk about that at Hyatt Field, which is next door. And I'm not exactly sure exactly where it was, but that's Harrison SC. They had an okay season, but unlike the other teams, they did stick around for another season. So I'm just gonna sad. I would love to see a picture of it because it's actually. Tons of important games were played at Harrison Park, Harrison Oval, and I just like to find a picture. So just want to kind of show you where Harrison is if you don't know, in connection to here's Jersey City with Celtic and Manhattan, Bronx and Queens and Brooklyn over here, right? So there you go, Harrison SC. Not much to talk about this. This is a big important name, and we're going to go back up to Pawtucket, Rhode Island, Coates Field, J&P Coates Football Club, J&P Coates Athletic Association. Again, like Falco, it was a textile mill, big, I think it was a cotton mill. Far Alpaca was alpaca wool. The J&P Coates was a big club in this time period that played in the Southern New England League. They had their own field, Coates Field. It was JMP Coates' field. It was the field for the very first final of the National Challenge Cup, the very first U.S. Open Cup final. I think 10,000 people attended. Lots of important games there. JMP Coates came from Southern New England League, joined the American Soccer League, one of the top teams in the league at that point in time. They kind of drifted as the seasons went on. They won the league in the next year, 1922-23. But Coates Field is actually, it was there. I'm not exactly sure when it was built. Probably turn of the century-ish. And it lasted until the mid-20th century, and people still talk about it. It's now, it's like a Shoppers Food Warehouse or Rite Aid or something like this. And you can see this is a heritage site. It's a National Heritage Foundation site, the JMP Coates industrial area. You can see old, remains of old buildings that were here. I think there's a fire took out some of these buildings a few years ago, which is a shame. But you can see the old, like here, all this stuff is the old industrial or textile mills, and the field was here. And like a lot of these old fields, they've been taken over by other things. But yeah, JMP Coates, super important. It's one of those names that, because it's not like a regular team name, people kind of, I think they dismiss if you don't really know a lot about soccer. But big time team, really important. They had their own soccer field. It was theirs. They brought in a bunch of crowds. They're on the edge of Pawtucket and Central Falls, I believe it's called, is right here. It's on Lonsdale Avenue. It was called Coates Field. Oftentimes you'd hear Lonsdale Avenue grounds, the term for things like that. So JMP Coates, Athletic Association's football club. I'd love to find better pictures of this that I can add. It's a historic area. It's one of those places kind of like Mark Stadium, the Marksman's Field, that I think it'd be great to stick there's a lot of tradition. There's tons of tradition there, and I think it's a place. I mean, if I had an unlimited amount of money, I'd love to stick a stadium, old school stadium there, soccer stadium there, and Anyway, that's JMP Coates. There are pictures out there. I just gotta find them. Moving on alphabetically. This one, not 100% on this one, and I'll tell you why when I get there. So we're gonna go back down to New York City. Another team that was around for a while. It was called New York Football Club. This is not the New York Field Club. There's a kind of anecdotal kind of evidence out there about calling this team Field Club. We can talk a little bit more about that when we get to Philadelphia, but this was the New York Football Club. They would actually become the New York Soccer Club the next season, and then there was another one later on. It gets a little confusing. But New York Football Club, they've been around for, I think, 1916. They played in the National Association Football League. Again, pro team, big time team. They're called New York FC for a reason. They came into the league, one of the top teams in the league. They did really well. They made runs at National Challenge Cups, things like that. They had Archie Stark, who's one of the top goal scorers in U.S. soccer history. Loaded team. They played in New York Oval, which again, you see, it's not here. This one, I'm not 100% sure where this stadium was. It was said to be on River and 150th Street, and so that could mean it's here's River, here's 150th Street. That could be any one of these four quadrants. I've also seen that it was on 149th Street, so I think it was here. It was also used as a baseball park, like a lot of things were. I think a Negro League baseball team played there at least 1 year. So that's New York Oval. It was around for a while. It's really interesting. I can't really easily find any images of it. Another issue is, at this time, a lot of these different parks would kind of take over the same name, or just be called that name in the papers, New York Oval, Harlem Oval, things like that. There are some indications that there was, or folks thought New York Oval was across the river here, and I think there was other ones called New York Oval across the Harlem River into Manhattan Island, kind of up here. Dyckman Oval is way up higher, but there was this at the beginning of this season. There was a tour of a big time English women's team called Dick Kerr Ladies FC, and came across to the U.S. in 1921 in the I think late summer, and played men's teams and did very well. They won some games. The games they lost, they weren't really blown out. They were just a top-notch team, and they brought a bunch of crowds. When they played a couple games in New York, they played the New York Oval, but it was said that they played at 145th and River, which would put it up here somewhere, across the river. So I'm not quite sure what's going on there. I'm like 95% certain that the New York Oval that the New York FC played at least almost their entire season. Maybe they played a match or two across the river and they called that New York Oval because they were New York FC. But I'm 95% sure that New York Oval of New York FC is located in the Bronx here across the Harlem River. If I'm wrong, please tell me, because it's just, I want to be right with all this kind of stuff. So they would be in the league for a while. They stayed around for a while after this first season, changed names like a lot of these teams did, but they stayed here for a good number of years. We will let's see, what's next? Yep. All right, so two more teams. The first one is Philadelphia FC, and I talked a little bit about the Field Club name, which was popular in the turn of the century, the first couple decades. You see organizations use the term Field Club. It's kind of similar to Athletic Association, Country Club, but in papers, I think journalists would see FC and assume it was one or the other, or assume it was Field Club and use that when they weren't supposed to. And so you'll see in Wikipedia and places like this, they call New York FC, New York Football Club that I just talked about, New York Field Club. It's not. They might have been erroneously referred to that a couple times in the paper. 100% New York FC in 1921-22 is New York Football Club. There's another team 10, 12 years later that was called the Field Club. Completely different organization. Philadelphia FC, just real quickly, it's traditionally, you'll see it, historians, Colin Jost is the biggest kind of ASL historian, been doing this for a long time, refers to them as the Philadelphia Field Club. And what I've seen in papers for Philadelphia FC is almost a 50-50 split between football club and field club. So I personally just call them Philadelphia FC because I'm really not sure if they're Philadelphia Field Club or Philadelphia Football Club. If somebody could come and easily convince me they're definitely the Field Club, I've got don't have a problem with it. It's just from my personal, just me personally, I don't know. I don't know if they're the Philadelphia Football Club or Philadelphia Field Club. Anyway, so I call them Philadelphia FC. So, we talked about Bethlehem Steel at the beginning. Basically, this is the Bethlehem Steel Football Club organization moved to Philadelphia. The people who ran Bethlehem Steel created this team, and it was, with their money, they ran the team, and they had that type of management. But it was supposed to exist with Bethlehem Steel, right, for the 1921-22 season. It's a completely new team. It's Philadelphia FC. It hadn't played, completely new organization, hadn't played anywhere before. But Bethlehem Steel dropped out in August. Falco FC joined. So there's some confusion that, this is Bethlehem Steel transplanted for one season to Philadelphia and then they returned. No, it's actually a separate organization. It just happens to be run by the leadership of Bethlehem Steel. Bethlehem Steel decided at the last minute not to join. They were going to be the same. Those two teams were going to play in the ASL this season, but Bethlehem Steel dropped out, and then they, like I said, they did return the next season. So so they they had a ton. Philadelphia FC had a ton of money. They had organized leadership from pretty much one of, if not the best soccer team at this point in time, running them. And they bought a bunch of players, and so they won the season. Philadelphia FC won the first season of the American Soccer League, won the title. They too then disappeared. They only lasted one season. The Bethlehem Steel leadership. That Philadelphia didn't really draw as much as they thought they would. This would be a theme throughout the entire time in the American Soccer League, that Philadelphia teams, there was a rotation of new Philadelphia clubs in the American Soccer League. They just didn't draw like they thought they should. They would. I'm not sure why, but these Philadelphia, again, a huge hotbed of soccer. It was played super popular, tons of amateur teams, semi-pro teams, but for whatever reason, the Philadelphia teams in the American Soccer League just couldn't get an audience enough for them to make it financially worthwhile. So Philadelphia FC won the first season, and then they dropped out. And a new Philadelphia team took over that franchise the next season, and a slightly different name. So they moved around a bit, and I think you'll see this with Philadelphia teams in the American Soccer League. They had to move around a bit. I'm not sure what the reasons were. This was a learning experience for me. I thought these two fields were the same thing. We'll talk about. So the first 3 games they played in the league, they played at Northeast High School Athletic Field. At 29th and Clearfield, you'll see a lot of the papers say, oh, such and such is playing at 29th and Clearfield, or 29th in Cambria. You'll see Cambria here. This is 29th going north-south on this. Cambria here and Clearfield here. And I, not knowing, being a Philadelphian, I always thought basically this was the same stadium, just using different like just different parts, like different intersections and different names, because at this point in time people use different names for all kind of stuff. But what you'll see is, you can read it here. Here's a different field, Houston Field of Central High School. This is Northeast High School Athletic Field. What I learned, again, I love more information, is right around this area of Philadelphia in the early part of the 20th century, a little up here in this whole area, there was, right next to each other, there was a bunch of different athletic fields for mostly high schools, all kind of smashed together. It wasn't just one field or two. There was a bunch of different ones. So as I'm doing research, I'm figuring out which field they played at. So first 3 games of the 1921-22 season, Philadelphia FC played here at 29th and West, 29th and West Cambria, even though they called it 29th in Clearfield. It's just the the terminology at the time. Again, I have no idea what this looks like. I think there's a field still here. Yeah, it's still there. It's oriented this way, kind of east to west, which is this is one of the few times where the field that they played at is literally still here. So this field that you're looking at right now is where Philadelphia FC played their first 3 matches. And you see there's another old field. It's no longer here. You can see the outline of the track here. There's another field. Here's a little soccer field here. You can barely see it. This is a completely different field, but you can see here on this map. Take a second. 1921, I believe. There's 2 separate fields here. The main field the Philadelphia FC played at for this season was Cahill Field, which I thought these were the same ones, but it's actually here. I don't have a picture of it. Now it's been taken over by like the Philadelphia Water Authority or something like that. You can see again the track right here, the bit of a track running this way. I believe the field was oriented like this. The grounds were I think either leased or bought by the Roman Catholic High School as their athletic field, and built Cahill Field. Doesn't have anything to do with Thomas Cahill. It's a completely separate Cahill from the American Soccer League. They built a field here, and there's a lot of, and I think this field was active until like the 90s, mid-90s. Again, you'll see they're playing at Cahill Field at the corner of 29th in Clearfield or 29th in Cambria. They'll say the 29th in Clearfield Stadium or 29th in Cambria Stadium. They played most of their matches here, out of 10 or so. I think they played 10 here, 3 at Northeast High School, 10 here. So yeah, I'd love to get a picture of this because it's a pretty important venue in Philadelphia. A lot of soccer was played here, again, football and other kind of stuff. But yeah, as you can see, it's got all chopped up halfway when the city took it back over. There were stadias kind of up here and over here and over here. Yeah, so it's just very interesting. So those are the two in this section of the city. They did play a few matches. I think 3 in the first season. Yeah, 3 matches. They played 6 at Cahill and 3 at Northeast. They did play at National League Park, Phillies Park, also called the Baker Bowl later. Almost after this season, it's called Baker Bowl. So this was the Phillies National League Baseball Park is the official name. And they played a few matches here in that first season. They would play a lot more. The second team in Philadelphia play more here. But they'd only fill 1,000, 2,000 of these seats, so it cost them a lot of money. But yep, they played here at the Baker Bowl. Let me just hide it for a second. Right there. Now it's just like a lot of stuff, light industrial, but it's cool. It's these houses here were when you look at the Sanborn map from 1921. It's like what you think of when you think of tradition. When people talk about traditional soccer, of like, oh, it sits in a neighborhood. It sat in a neighborhood. There's houses here. People in these houses in these right around here could just walk across the street and go see a baseball game or a soccer game. Yeah, so there you go. That's National League Park or the Baker Bowl. Last team number 8, Todd Shipyards, which again, I love these industrial names. Todd Shipyards was in Brooklyn. Again, I don't have a picture of this. Let me zoom out a little bit. It was an amalgamation of, I think Todd Shipyards was a big conglomerate of shipyards, which had taken in a bunch of other smaller shipyards. The Tebow Yacht Basin, it was a Todd Shipyards hadn't wasn't around before this 1921-22 American Soccer League season. The Robbins Dry Dock team, which had won the National Challenge Cup, I think the year before, one of the biggest. It had so much money. Teams. It was part of the National Association Football League that we had talked about. Robbins Dry Dock was just kind of one of the teams to beat at that time. This conglomeration of shipyard kind of ownership also owned a amateur team called Tebow Yacht Basin FC, which is amateur. Robbins Dry Dock was supposed to join the American Soccer League. They ended up merging the Tebow Yacht Basin and the Robbins Dry Dock professional team to be Todd Shipyards, to be the team for the entire conglomeration. So it had a ton of money and was expected to do real well, and it did. It was a very good team. It was one of the top teams in the league. It had its own field called Todd Shipyards Athletic Fields on Columbia Street and Lorraine in Brooklyn. I'll just zoom out here. I don't have a map of it. Don't quite have a picture of it. Again, important field. Play a lot of games. I think it was this northern chunk here. I'm not sure if it went all the way down here, but now it was in the late 30s. It was taken over and a bunch of housing was put up. As you can see, it was this chunk. I think it's like the Red Hook Federal Housing or something like that. It was a scrubby field. They had a few stands. But yeah, Todd Shipyards, again, another important team. In Brooklyn, again, like a lot of these teams, Todd's dropped out after the first season of the American Soccer League. It was just too much money for them to outlay, and they withdrew after that first season. So out of those 8, Celtic, Falco, Fall River United, the original Philadelphia FC. So 5 of them, Todd, didn't return the next season. Their franchises were taken over by other teams. Only New York FC, JMP Coates, and Harrison returned after that first season. The Todd Shipyard's Brooklyn franchise actually was open. They American Soccer League started the 2022-2023 season with 7 teams. The Brooklyn franchise, nobody filled it until a month or so into the season, when a new team called the Brooklyn Wanderers, who had been playing in another league, took over that franchise about a month into the ASL season. And Brooklyn Wanderers is another big name in Golden Age U.S. soccer history. Again, it was different teams, but the ASL had these franchises located in these places, and they wanted a new team to fill it, and that's what happened with Brooklyn Wanderers. The season was a mild success. The first season, there's a lot of money that was lost, as you can see, with the turnover of the teams because of the amount of travel. Honestly, they literally talked about how much travel it cost for these teams to travel up and down so many seasons, so many games. 24, I believe I said. Yeah, I think it was the 24 game season. That a lot of teams, most teams lost money, or broke even at best. And so it's interesting that this whole travel issue has always been there, and has been an issue that leagues and teams have had to deal with in this season. But first season was a success, probably a mild success. The ASL didn't really hit their stride until two seasons later, probably 23, 24, 25. It's probably when they started hit their stride for that good 5-6 year time period. Anyway, so this is something new I'm trying out. Like I said, informal. I like to ramble, or I can't help but ramble. So we'll see how this goes. I'd love to do more of this if people enjoy it, if it looks kind of good and I enjoy it. So there you go, the 1921-22 ASL kind of quick summary of the season via where the venues were located. I'm Dan Creel. Check me out on Soccer Almanac and all the protagonist stuff I do. And yep, I'll talk to you guys later. Bye.